Well, welcome back to our third episode of our dual language immersion series through Keep Indiana Learning. And today I have with us the founder of Global Prep Academy, Dr. Mariama Shaheed. Welcome to our episode today.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Well, I know a lot about you. I know that you are an award-winning educator. And when I first came across your work, you were in Pike Township, but it was in that township where you started to have a dream about dual language immersion. So can you tell us a little bit about how that dream came to life and what your goal was when that really started tugging on your heart?
Yeah, absolutely. I often tell people that Global Prep was born inside of me many years before our doors opened in 2016. So, like you said, I was in Pike Township, and I had been reared in that district for 17 years. I was a teacher there. I was a student teacher there. I was a teacher there. I was assistant principal. I was a principal. And the thing I loved about the district was the level of diversity. So there were students from when I started there in 1998. When I first started there, it was pretty much African American and Caucasian students. And as I taught more there, I had more and more Spanish speaking families. And for me, I got so excited because I saw the increase in diversity, and my love for Spanish was born when I was in high school. So I had taken Spanish in high school and in college. And by the time I had my first Spanish speaking child in my classroom in Pike, I had been studying the language for 9 years, and I couldn't put a sentence together. And I think, how can you study a language for so long, but there be this gap between being able to communicate with the people who speak that language as their native tongue? And so for me, I was like, okay, how can I put this all together? And through immersion, I left Pike Township for 6 weeks. I went to Mexico. I lived language and culture. I didn't see another face that looked like mine for that entire 6 weeks, but I lived with the family. I took classes. And when I came back, I was able to put it together. And so I think at that point, it was like the power of immersion in language production. It was clear to me that's the way that you learn a language. And so when I was able to come back, I was the only administrator in the district at the time that spoke Spanish. And so anytime I spoke Spanish, the Spanish speaking families would like flock to me because someone understood their language. And what surprised me was that, whenever I would speak in Spanish, African American families would often say to me, "How do you know this? Like, sister, why are you speaking Spanish? And where did you learn Spanish? And you're from here." And I saw this desire for African American families to also have the language access for their children. And so I went to my superintendent at the time and I said, "Mr. Jones, I've got this great idea. We need to do what Lawrence is doing. We need to have a bilingual school." And he's like, "Yeah, not right now." So, I loved working for him and I loved all the opportunities that I got in the district, but I knew it was time for me to do something different because I saw this opportunity gap that existed for children of color that either had this as their native tongue or a desire, and they just couldn't get it. And I don't feel like the language immersion is something you should have to pay for. And so I went into a 2-year fellowship and started and researched what would be Global Prep Academy, and we opened our doors in 2016.
So tell us a little bit about what a typical day looks like at Global Prep Academy for students and families.
Yeah. So we're fortunate to serve grades pre-K through grade 8. So as you can imagine, it looks a little different depending on the grade level. But for our pre-K students, 90% of their days in Spanish. So for them, many students have never been in school before. They come to our pre-K and they believe that school is just done in Spanish. And so 90% of the days in Spanish for them, 10% in English. And then from K all the way up to 8, it's 50-50 program. So our students have the same grade level standards. They're required to learn the same grade level standards of any other student in the state of Indiana, but it's through 2 different languages. So half the day they have a teacher that teaches through English. The other half the day they have a teacher that teaches those standards through Spanish. And that's the true immersion. So we're not teaching kids to speak Spanish. We're teaching content through Spanish. And our students that are both African American and native Spanish speaking, mostly Latinx, are learning through both of those languages.
And so, what supports do you have for your teachers? Because I'm imagining that you
Yeah.
probably have some teachers that may not speak Spanish, and obviously you have some teachers that are Spanish speaking teachers. So, what does it look like getting those Spanish speaking teachers into your school,
Yeah.
especially with the conversation around the teacher shortage? So, you're not only are you looking for an excellent teacher, but you're also looking for an excellent teacher who also is proficient in teaching content in the Spanish language.
I'm telling you, that's one of the biggest challenges I think of a dual immersion school is the staffing. And for us, we believe it's important to have diversity in staffing, even on the Spanish side. So, really proud that within our staffing model, our all of our teachers who teach in Spanish are native Spanish speakers, and they come from 16 different countries. And so, while many schools will pull from just one country for Spanish speakers, we pull from Mexico, from Ecuador, from Cuba, from Puerto Rico, from Dominican Republic, all over. And so our students get the diversity of language. Now, the challenge is that many of these people don't just live in the state of Indiana. So we have a combination of both visas. So we recruit teachers internationally to come to teach at Global Prep. And then we also have teachers who actually have been living in the United States for years. Maybe they were a licensed teacher in their native country and they need help getting licensed here. And so that's been one of our biggest shifts we've made over the last 5 years is really working with people who already have Indiana as their home. They're going to be here not just for 5 years on a visa, but for many, many years thereafter. And so we've provided tuition support. We've provided support with taking the test. We've worked with actually DC, where they have the PC-MAS, which is where they can take the teaching assessment in Spanish, their native language, so they have a better chance of passing it. And we've had teachers become licensed that way. Then they have this certification that they've passed the assessment and they're able to make that and turn that into their Indiana teaching license. So it's definitely been a challenge. It's probably one of the things I think is most important, though, for our global school to be realized is to have diversity of teachers on the English side as well as on the Spanish side.
So that sounds wonderful with the extra supports that you're providing with teachers. What does the
Yeah.
professional development look like, especially when you're having a Spanish speaking teacher working with an English, first language teacher? What does that look like with that cross curricular and that collaboration?
Yeah, I think it's definitely challenging. One of the things from the time that we opened our doors, we staffed our school with a dual language director. So we have someone who's a native Spanish speaker, who at one point was a dual language teacher and a dual language instructor at the college level, who's on our staff. And so that's one of the supports we have in place for our Spanish speaking teachers. But then we also have like intentional coaching supports for staff, whether they're English speaking teachers or Spanish speaking teachers. And so all teachers have a coach that they work with, a mentor that they work with, and we have professional learning that happens in the summer, but then also weekly based on the content that people teach and the language that they teach in.
So earlier you mentioned the visas, and I'm thinking maybe some school leaders may be scared or intimidated by
Yeah.
like the paperwork. Like, what did you have to do to really wrap your mind around like all like the legal processes that you would have to go through to get someone here? And then once you get someone that has accepted the job, has jumped through all the hoops, how do you support them in their move to America if they are moving here from another country?
Yeah. Great question. One of the things I will say when we first started, there were so many things that I did not know how to do. And so one of the things I was intentional about is finding people who actually know how to do that and finding companies and supports for that. Initially, when we opened, we worked with Cordell Hull, and they were a visa sponsoring agency, and they were in New York. Since then, a lot has happened in the state of Indiana. And so, with the Sagamore Institute, that's who we work with directly for our visas. And so, we have a direct relationship with the Sagamore Institute, and we have annual communication around how many teachers we're looking to bring in. And then when it comes to us recruiting, we then send them to Sagamore to go through all the paperwork. And so they do all the paperwork, they take care of that, and then they let us know when things are approved to move forward. And so, we have not had to work with immigration attorneys or figure out the laws around immigration. We work with the Institute, and they are able to set everything up. And then we pay a fee to them to do that. So they're able to come here for 3 years, and then they have a 2-year extension, which means that for the work that we put into making sure that our mission is realized, we have a teacher here for 5 years. And especially as we look at now what's happening with the teacher shortage and how long people are staying in the profession, to have a dedicated, licensed, committed teachers for 5 years is something that we've seen is completely worth it. And the partnership with Sagamore has been great. The other thing I will say though too is, we have a very diverse staff, and so many of our teachers have been the very teacher who went through this whole process. And so when it comes to bringing in teachers from abroad, we know that when you come to the United States, you don't have a social security card, a social security number, you don't have um, credit history, none of those things. And so we know that when you bring teachers internationally, there's a lot of support you have to provide on the front end. So one of the things we do is we provide housing for the first 3 weeks when they come here, whether it be a long-term stay, an Airbnb, a staff member that they stay with. We know they're going to need that support when they come in. And then we actually go with them to the Social Security office to get their paperwork together. We go with them to the license branch. We go with them to the bank, and all those things that I think you can take for granted when you've lived in this country your whole life. And so the beautiful thing about our school culture and our staff culture is that our teachers have at some point been on the side of coming in and needing that support, or now giving that to support to someone else when they come in. And it's something I'm really proud of, that's just a part of our school culture now.
So I know a parent of a child at your school, so I know there's lots of events that happen. Can you share with us some of the cultural or the cool events that your school has been able to do as a DLI school that may be interesting to parents who may be on the fence about, putting a child in a DLI program?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one of the things that we learned really quickly when our school first opened, that language is one of the pieces that brings people to global prep, but it's a cultural immersion that's what keeps them here. And so there are a lot of different things we do. Some of our annual events will include, we have a Dia de los Muertos celebration that happens in October, but we also have a really huge African American History Month celebration happens in February. And we also have a huge December celebration of many cultures that happen. And so we think it's really important that people understand when you choose global prep, we're going to focus on the cultural immersion and identity from many different places, not just Spanish. And so I know for African American families, that's one of the things they often ask. It's like, I want my child to still feel proud of who they are as an African American, even if they're in a DLI environment. And that's something that as an African American mother and educator is important to me too, that we affirm identity and we have cultural celebrations to do that. The other thing, though, I'll say is we have different clubs that kids can be a part of. So this past year, we had this Latin dance club. And so that club, they performed all over the city because we think it's important for kids to have a sense of audience. It's not just something cool you do in school, but an opportunity to do things outside of the school. And so we're fortunate to have teachers who understand that value of the cultural immersion. And so all the cool things that we do to bring kids into different cultures are led by staff.
I love that. I know earlier we talked a little bit about visas, as that can be something that's of a challenge, but you have support with that. Are there some other challenges that you've had to face or maybe didn't know about until you got into this work that other people should be
Yeah.
mindful of that's thinking about pursuing this path?
One of the things I think that really I shifted a great deal in this work is about authenticity with the language. So one of the things that's very common now, especially because there's so many Spanish speakers in the United States, translations are just very common. But we look for authentic text. And so when we looked for what was going to be our literacy curriculum that we adopted in Spanish, we looked to see what curriculum is out there that's not just translated from English to Spanish. What
Mm.
had real authentic stories from Latin countries? Where could we find things that kids could see themselves? And so I think that's one thing that people often don't think about or take for granted is that, you can just get something translated. Not so much. The other thing is, there's a lot of great resources that are out there for students that often are just in English. And so, one of the lifts that we have on Spanish speaking staff is how do you translate things to be able to use those same cool resources in a second language? And so, supporting staff with that because they see all these cool things coming out in English, that aren't necessarily there in Spanish. So supporting staff to do that, and doing stipends and things like that for the extra work that often requires of them is something that's been a part of has become a part of our culture as we've learned in this process.
So on the other side of that, I'm sure you've had some success stories. I know you are a pre-K through 8 school, but and you may not have kids that have gotten through high school. But what types of successes have you heard from maybe students, staff, and families that you think is important to share with us today?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Last year, well, let's see, 2023, we had our first eighth grade graduates. And our eighth grade graduates have now gone through a bilingual K-8 experience and are now in high school. And we know that dual language immersion is a long game. I hear people all the time like, oh, I think it'd be so cool for my kid to learn Spanish. I'm like, it's not going to happen in a year. It's not going to happen in 2 years. But what we're seeing is the longer kids stay in the program, what they're able to do, produce, the confidence that they speak in 2 languages is unbelievable. This year's graduate speaker at our eighth grade graduation was one of our fellow graduates. And she came back and she addressed the students, the graduates. She addressed the families and community members. She did her speech completely in English and completely in Spanish. And that wasn't just her as a graduate. That was also all of our eighth grade speakers. Every last one of them, whether they were native Spanish speakers or not, every last one of them speaks in both languages. And my vision was always that kids would speak, read, and write, dream, and also lead in 2 languages. And seeing that happen now that we're completing year 8 is just amazing. And knowing that ability to speak, read, write, dream, and lead is not just for those who are native Spanish speaker is one of the greatest achievements, I think, of my professional career.
Yeah, I really love the dream part because they always say once you really get a language into your heart, you start dreaming in that language. So
That's
I
it.
think some of those things are those things that, I mean, as an educator, you can't measure, uh,
Yeah.
but it's a thing that happens and you may have that qualitative data there, but it's so important and you can really see how it's ingrained. As we're coming to a close, what
Yeah.
final thoughts do you have for educators who may want to teach in a DLI school, people that want to pursue this path, and maybe to families, because sometimes families may be scared to send
Mm,
their kids to a school where their child is learning a language that they don't know. And they may feel like, I can't support my child. How can I support my
yeah.
child doing social studies in Spanish if I don't have Spanish knowledge? So, what final thoughts do you have for us?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I guess if I would probably narrow it down, I would say that to what I said a few moments ago, that the dual language immersion journey is a long game. It's a long game, and it starts with what are your core beliefs about what you want the world to be, what you want Indiana to be, what you want your child's experience to be. And we know that the United States, Indiana, is becoming more and more diverse. So if we want to prepare students for the future, we got to start now. And that means learning second languages is a part of that process. The other part is understanding the world that it looks different than you. And when a child's daily experience is that from pre-K to 8, it's not something where they get, shell shocked when they get into high school or shell shocked when they get into college. Our students know a diverse experience. And we want that to be true so that they can lead in diverse communities that we know will be not just in this city, in this state, but then also in this country.
Well, thank you. We thank you so much for spending some time with us today to tell us a little bit about your school. And one more thing I should ask you: how
Yeah.
can people get into contact with you if they would like to learn more?
Sure, yes. My email is mshaheed@globalprepindy.org. You can go to our website at www.globalprepindy.org, and you can get a lot more information about our school, our graduate aims, our graduate profile. You can see how diverse our staff is. I will say that it was about a few months ago, Dr. Katie Jenner came to Global Prep and could not believe the level of diversity that existed in this one school. Our staff mirror our students, and you can see that by going on our website. So if you're interested in learning more, please come to our website and you'll see additional information about how to get in touch with us.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Shaheed, for being here. And to our viewers, we will continue this series on our next episode.
Thank you.